You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbour and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
Well, Frank, this is pretty challenging stuff again.
Right.
And it's interesting, actually, if you thinking of listening to talk about these days, there are not a few people who are saying an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that we should live that way again.
Including some recent legislation, the 3 strikes, isn't it? It's very much part of that, yeah. Actually, this is one of my favourite passages, these first few verses about turning the other cheek, giving your cloak and going the extra mile, because in a way I suppose I've lived some of it, and it takes me back into the mid-80s when I was living in South Africa and came across Walter Wink's work and his explanation of this. So often these passages have been used about almost battered wife syndrome. You've got to put up with it, turn the other cheek.
Sort of wimpish, isn't it?
Indeed.
Sort of, yeah.
But it's not that at all. If you look at it more carefully. How do you strike somebody on the right cheek? The only way you can do it with your right hand is a backhand slap, which says, you're nothing, you're a dog, get out of my way. By turning the other cheek, you're saying, at least recognize me as a human being, as a real person. That's worth thinking about. The issue about if you sue someone for your coat, give them the cloak as well. In Jewish law at the time, you could sue someone for everything they had except their cloak, which had to be returned at night. And we need to recognize too that nakedness, the shame, was not on the person who was naked, but on the one who caused the nakedness. Who shamed them.
Yeah.
So by offering to give your cloak as well, you actually suddenly are in a position of power when you thought you were powerless.
It's quite subversive, that.
It's very subversive.
Quite subtle.
And I love it. I think it's wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
And the same is true of the third one, about going the extra mile. Roman law said that a Roman soldier could force any citizen, and remember this was an occupied place, so anybody could be forced to carry his pack for 1 mile. By offering to go another mile, you're putting the poor old Roman soldier actually in a terribly embarrassing position. And I think it's a lovely, very humorous picture. Here's this great big burly Roman soldier on his knees begging for his pack to be given back to him.
Because he could actually get into trouble.
Because he's going to get into trouble.
Yeah.
And this sort of non-violent action, which is what it is very powerful stuff, very subversive.
Think of our Gandhi statue down by the railway station.
Indeed, just down
this
there.
is going, back well beyond.
It is going back, and Martin Luther King, it's well within all that. St. Francis doing the same sort of thing.
You were talking about that in South Africa.
It was. I remember very well an incident when people's homes were being bulldozed in squatter camps, and one morning, very early in the morning, they came. Once the men had gone to work, and the women confronted the bulldozers actually by stripping off their clothes. And they stood there literally stripping off their clothes. For that day, it didn't get bulldozed. In the long run, it didn't help. It's not an easy way to go. But isn't this actually what the cross is about? Jesus doesn't retaliate. He absorbs the evil, and he actually shows the person or the people doing the evil, doing the damage, what they are like.
Yeah, and it's another way too. I think always we can get a bit hung up on that be perfect at the end, and we think again with the goal. But it's actually this whole sense of fulfillment and Jesus showing the way to that new way of living and that,
Yes.
that fulfillment and
And
completion.
a sense of completeness and
Yeah.
working towards that.
Yeah.
Indeed, lots of challenge in these passages,
Yeah.
and we've only touched on it.
And I think in an election year, love your enemies and
Good stuff.
real challenge for us all.
Indeed.